Welcome back to Cinematic. I'm Ryan, and I, of my own free will and volition, have compiled a big long list of action movies over on Letterboxd, linked below, many of the Hong Kong variety, and have slowly been making my way through that list over the course of maybe 40 episodes. We might be on 40 this week. If not, I apologize and stay tuned because it's probably next week. And I know I said I would do City Cops this week, which was a movie that made the list on a whim. Which one didn't? In that it featured Cynthia Rothrock, was directed by Lau Kar-leung's brother, Lau Kar-wing, and that's about it. Well, also, like I mentioned, it's just on YouTube, like not even like movies YouTube, like just some guy's channel. In fact, thanks to Freezer Cell, who has uploaded it at some point, and apparently nobody has asked him to take it down. Not a great copy. It's very low quality, pretty bad English dub, as it turns out. You can, if you want, again, speaking of City Cops so far, watch a pretty good looking copy on actual YouTube movies with ads. But ads. So the nitpicks got to me this week, I will admit, and I think I'm going to put City Cops off until I can own the thing in some way. And I don't just mean this VHS tape that's on sale on Amazon for $184.94. And yeah, that's the actual picture of it. Podcast people, if you can't see it, it's like very obviously like some vector art of a VHS tape that they're using to sell this, no doubt, completely legitimate VHS tape of City Cops. So I don't even know that this ever got a DVD release, actually. So I could be waiting a good long while, but for another time. Instead, we're going to do China O'Brien, which has been a long time coming. It's been on my list for a good long while. It's kind of impossible to deal in Cynthia Rothrock movies to any extent without coming across a China O'Brien somewhere along the way. And honestly, it's probably more of a natural progression from last week's episode, Best of the Best. I had that bit where I talked about the VHS shelf that I love and I think sometimes goes unappreciated. You know, that long list of movies that lived at your local video store that flew off the shelves from time to time. Best of the Best kind of seen success more there than in theaters. China O'Brien never appeared in theaters. I mean, not originally. There's probably been some, art house runs of it at this point, but this was a VHS, direct to video even back in the day, and was huge. Like it got its own VHS shelf alone. That was just, you remember that? Just, it would be like an entire wall was like one movie, and which probably led to a lot of people picking it up if there's probably a marketing strategy in there somewhere, but this was one of those. But I don't have to go far to make the Hong Kong action connection here because it is straight up a Golden Harvest production, China O'Brien is. And I think it's somewhere around the last of her 3-picture deal that began. And it gets fuzzy because I don't know when the movies were made versus when they came out. So this is quite possibly the last, although there was a China O'Brien 2 also under Golden Harvest, so I don't know. But this was towards the end of her original contract with Golden Harvest. And it was basically Golden Harvest's shot at putting Cynthia over in the States, which they had tried not too long ago with Jackie Chan in 1980 with Battle Creek Brawl. So what do? You get Robert Klaus, it turns out. The guy who directed Bruce Lee in Enter the Dragon, obviously, and again with Battle Creek Brawl in 1980 with Jackie Chan. So I don't know a lot about Robert Klaus beyond that, beyond his filmography that I can look at and form some opinions. Again, I'm doing that quite often with this series because I'm not an expert in any of these beyond what I can find on the internet. I'm guessing the reason Golden Harvest kept bringing him their Asian action stars was simply because he was the one that directed Enter the Dragon. Because I don't know, like Enter the Dragon's great. I know there's some like which movie is Bruce Lee's best movie? A bunch of that. I haven't seen them all. So again, I'm not the person to ask. But from all accounts, Enter the Dragon is probably still good regardless. So I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I don't know how much of that is Robert Klaus and how much of that is Bruce Lee. Actually, you know what I am saying? I think it's mostly Bruce Lee in that instance. I haven't seen all of Robert Klaus's movies, so this is still an unformed opinion. I don't know. Maybe he has some martial art. He's a Western director, though. I don't think most of his movies were even in the martial arts space, maybe American action space. I would almost guarantee to some extent, given how China O'Brien went. But I have seen enough Robert Klaus movies to doubt. Not that anybody should be judged by their worst movies, certainly, but he also directed Game of Death, which is a morbidly curious film for a million different reasons. One of which is literally morbid. I think I mention this every time, but it bears mentioning that it uses actual footage of Bruce Lee's body at his funeral. Can you do that without approval? Either way, I don't know how much Robert Klaus himself had a hand in that particular choice, but also the movie isn't good. And at the end, he put his name on it. So he's at the very least a bit of an enigma to me for this reason. So I'm actually going to open it up to you guys. I don't do this probably as often as I should, but what's the best Robert Klaus movie? Like, what's the one I should watch? Like, is it Enter the Dragon? Is that as good as it got? What is like the quintessential out of any of them either, not just, action or whatever, like Robert Klaus movie that I should check out? And why is it Jim Cotta? Anyway, so China O'Brien comes towards the end of Klaus's career, and at the same time, apparently, Rothrock says a lot of this going by her Art of Action episode with Scott Adkins, but she also has her own YouTube channel if you want to check it out, where she does talk about, in fact, I'm halfway through an older video of theirs, I think was made during COVID, with her and Richard Norton, where they just kind of talk about stuff, which is a lot of fun. So you can go find stuff like that. But she says in some of those videos that they shot both movies, both China O'Brien's 1 and 2, within 6 weeks and simultaneously, to the point where she would show up not knowing what scenes they were going to throw at her some days. And unfortunately, that included the action scenes. So I'm going to talk about the action before I even talk about the story, which is kind of the opposite of how China O'Brien does it. But Golden Harvest was able to send a team, apparently. So guys that Rothrock had worked with before, was kind of used to. But apparently Klaus had a very different style. And when approached, Cynthia doesn't recount word for word the conversation, but she says when she approached him about, doing it like they did it in Hong Kong or something like that, apparently his only response was that this was how I shot Bruce Lee, and this is how I'm going to shoot China O'Brien. So I'm going to go ahead and say, having seen China O'Brien and the action sequences in China O'Brien, not a great choice. Robert Klaus, or at the very least, not a great matchup. Like, it's still above average. The action sequences in this movie are still above average. But anything like before this, like anything Cynthia Rothrock before China O'Brien is going to be better action-wise. And she says so herself. I'm not getting all hoity-toity with my Hong Kong action here. She talks about how she would show up on some of those sets and they would be like, okay, we're going to do this. And she would be like, I can't do that. And then by the end of the day, she would be doing that. So those directors had a way of using her, I'm directing her, that, speaks for itself. Go watch any of those. I've talked about some of them already. Obviously, she had it in her and turned it in. Unfortunately, it seems like that was rarely the case when it came to her US productions. Like, action was almost an afterthought. She talks about one particular movie, I think Tiger Claws, where she showed up, which Tiger Claws isn't on my list. I don't know that I had heard about it before or when she talked about it, and you'll see why I didn't put it on the list, because she said she showed up and they were and asked like, okay, where's the choreographer? And somebody just looked at her and was like, oh, well, you're a martial artist. You can do that, right? Which, lame. That's like, I think about all the times I've showed up to a job with my, DSLR at the time or my mirrorless now, and somebody's like, oh, you take photos, right? I mean, I can, but this isn't even one of those times. And obviously there would be some crossover. There are plenty of martial artists that are, in fact, we've talked about a lot of them, do double or have found a career also in choreography or action direction or, fight design or however you want to put it. That's not everybody, and it doesn't mean that everybody has to. That's like, again, somebody showing up to a job and then being like, okay, but I really want you to do this. And that person being like, I didn't show up for that. It's not even like what I want to do. So obviously I have some feelings about that type of stuff, but this kind of begins, we're going to see this, especially as I keep doing some of these US productions. And she gets into this with Scott Adkins, who has experienced a bit of it himself, I'm sure, where, they show up at an action movie and it seems like the action is an afterthought of sorts. So stay tuned. Like I said, you're still going to get something above average and certainly more honest. It's not like they had to cut up her stuff to make it look like action still. We're not doing that. It's just not owned. It's not optimized cinematically, so to speak, and quite possibly not the focus of the film. So on some level, it's hard to criticize it for that necessarily. It just kind of seems like a bummer that you would employ some of these people and then not play to their strengths in a way. So what is the focus of China O'Brien? Well, Rothrock plays a cop. In fact, the movie starts with her training a class of cops in martial arts, and she gets called out by one of her students. That's basically like meet me after class type thing, except in an alley. So she does that and continues to school the lot of them, but it turns out that it's an actual gang and not the guys that were going to show up. So when a gun comes out of the shadows at her, she responds with firing her gun, not like a Molotov cocktail or something. Although, write that down somewhere. But it turns out that there was a kid holding the gun. So she kills a kid pretty early on in the film, turns in her badge because of it, and heads home to the town of Beaver Creek, where her boyfriend Matt is played by Richard Norton. And we talked about him some in Millionaire's Express and The Magic Crystal. This is his 4th of 12 movies with Rothrock. They were a bit of a dream team, it seemed. I believe it became known that if you put them in the same movie together, it was going to make money. And I think at this point that had yet to be disproven. And if I could heap some more praise upon Richard Norton, I think I talked about how he's an actor that really does know the assignment. And I hope I also mentioned that he's actually also very good. I think he is quite possibly the best actor. Okay, there's a few very good actors, typecast or not, archetypal or not, in this movie, but he is one of them. Like he, especially in a time where even if it's at the tail end, they were still recruiting action, like martial artists to be actors instead of the other way around. He excels. Richard Norton excels at the role of Matt the boyfriend in this movie, in addition to the martial artistry. Also in Beaver Creek, Sheriff O'Brien himself. So Cynthia's father, China's father, is the city sheriff, just going around cleaning up the town as best he can, which is great. But I'm quite possibly most excited about the Beaver Creek resident that is played by an actor who's named Keith Cook. He plays Dakota in the film, and he kind of pops up around town. He's following Cynthia and Richard Norton around until finally they confront him. And all during that time, I'm like, okay, who's this dude? And then as it goes on, I'm like, no, wait, really, who is this guy? And then there's an action sequence where he is an obvious skilled martial artist. And I'm like, okay, yeah, he's Reptile from Mortal Kombat. And I think he was in Annihilation too, but let's not right now. Turns out Keith Cook is an expert in martial arts and taekwondo, karate, wushu. In fact, he trained in China for a good long while, competed as well in China and did well. If that tells you anything. He's great on screen, so I'm kind of interested to find out what happened to him, where he's at, like what he's doing nowadays, where that went. But I think I will save that until we watch the Mortal Kombat movie. So that's fun, but pretty much right off the bat in that fight where I'm like, oh, Keith Cook really knows what he's doing. I notice that not only does he know what he's doing, but he appears to be given more than Rothrock, who's still, you can't hide the talent, but by the end of that fight, I'm like, oh, okay, well, I hope they really give her something to do. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me that they wouldn't at least, again, play to her strengths. She picks up some weapons at some point, as she does in a lot of her movies, because she's skilled at weapons combat, at forms, and it's like nobody told Robert Klaus or whoever the action director was, which I'm kind of afraid to look up at this point. But again, it's not the focus of the film. So I'm shifting my gaze somewhat here, because this is her movie. Like, she is the full-on protagonist in this thing, telling her story. They're up against a criminal mastermind in the form of Mr. Summers, which doesn't sound that threatening maybe, but he does kidnap and tie up a lady pretty early on, and then continue to car bomb both Cindy's dad, like the sheriff of the town, and his dashing young deputy, kind of the last two good cops left. And so Officer Creepo gets promoted, but Cindy also decides to straight up run for sheriff. So it's kind of a Walking Tall, actually, which, if there was a movie that did The Walking Tall before Walking Tall, I apologize. I think there's two Walking Talls at this point. Wasn't that remade with, is it The Rock? I think both of them fine from what I remember. But, oh, you know what? Just go watch Rebel Ridge. Actually, very much go watch Rebel Ridge. It's kind of the latest take on this thing where, a town is almost held hostage by a corrupt police force, and they're so removed enough that there's almost no oversight, that type of thing. Go watch Rebel Ridge. Just do that. Not like instead of China O'Brien. China O'Brien is good. I probably haven't said enough of that just because it did take me a while to get over the whole choreography thing. The bad guys try and rig the election. So this takes the form of another knockdown, drag out. Maybe the one, like, it goes on for a bit longer and Cynthia is giving more to do. But again, Norton, I'm not sure that Cook is in this particular fight, but Norton is given more and better to do, it seems like. She's also doubled more than the guys, which I don't get. But they clean up. They save the election. I mean, the plan appeared to be, maybe there was more than one ballot box. The movie doesn't really show it. The plan seemed like send a couple toughs to the one ballot box and I guess do something to it. Maybe they catch them before they can do that, but they've basically just taken the two nice high school students that were supposed to deliver the ballot box hostage. Anyway, they fight and it's great. And China wins the election, and Summers gets shot. Like they follow him into a barn and they capture him, and Dakota, I'm spoiling the thing, but makes the decision to not kill him because of what he did to his mother. And on their way out, though, he's sniped through a window by the girl that he had taken hostage and tied up. So is the movie a little bit clunky? Sure. Is it downright abrupt at times? Also, some of the shots go on for too long. Some of them go on for not long enough. Like, they just kind of end. And movies are made by a lot of people. Like, any misgivings I have about Robert Klaus, just watch this movie, find the people having the time of their life. I mean, Cynthia Rothrock doesn't ever look like she's not just having, thankful for every single minute she's on screen, but also turning it in. She, in fact, in that video also talks about how she spoke with, I think, Don the Dragon Wilson, which pretty sure I have some of his movies, if not one of his movies on the list as well. just said, even when you end up in one of those movies, you give it your all. Cynthia's giving it her all. Richard Norton's giving it his all. Keith Cooks is giving it his all, and everybody else. Like watch this movie, find those people, and who cares about the rest to some extent. It is a good time. It's sad to see them barely tap some of that massive talent that they have at their hands, but that's going to be something of a theme the more we get into these American productions. Speaking of which, if you come back next week, it might be about Angel Town, which I know even less. Why did this make the list? I believe there's probably an Art of Action episode on the lead actor, who is Olivier Gruner. Yes, there was an Art of Action episode, now that I remember. So we'll see how it goes. Come back and see how it goes with Angel Town. Also come back every Tuesday for another Tetris game. I do those live if you want to just straight up talk to me. Or every Wednesday at 8 a.m. for a new pack of Marvel cards. We are getting down to it, which might still be like 8 or 7 packs left, which would still be 7 weeks down the line. I'm toying with some different ideas for all of these series to kind of fine tune them. So maybe those will come a little bit quicker, but if you have it in your heart, you can also find me on patreon.com/Ryan_runs_, where you can subscribe. I know that's kind of the bigger ask. It'll take $2 out of your account like clockwork every month. Or you can just throw something in the tip jar by way of PayPal, and I hope soon buy me a coffee. So maybe I shouldn't even mention that at this point, but the more the better, right? Like these guys.